So let me make a small introduction. Javier is the IT director of the MSC company. In fact, the attendees in some way know you because I'm repeating that video about you many times during the day. Do you know what video I'm talking about? You're talking about SQL Server 2022. Specialized in administration, performance tuning, high availability, and disaster recovery. Microsoft MVP since 2016 and MCT. And spoke in many conferences, SQL Saturdays, virtual groups, past marathons, and so on. So, Javier, it's up to you. You can take the stage.
All right, very good. Let me just share my screen. 1 second. Is this screen? You see my screen, my PowerPoint presentation? Hello, you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see your presentation. Everything all right.
Okay. Okay, excellent. Very good. So let me start. First of all, thank you, Dennis, for the invitation to present for the Malta Data Platform User Group. I present in the past. It's always a pleasure to me to be here with this great community. Today, based on the SQL Server 2022 Query Processing Conference, which I believe is a great initiative, considering that SQL Server was recently released and what the performance capability is one of the most important things, in my opinion. Not the only one, but definitely one of the most important ones. We will try to cover then briefly today 2 of the components of the query optimization phase within SQL Server 2022. We will be covering what is called intelligent query processing next generation, and there is one specific component that we will be focusing on, which is CE feedback, Cardinality Estimation Feedback, and then we will also cover parameter sensitive plan optimization. Right. During the presentation, we will mainly cover these 2 topics, and we will see them in action with an interesting demo. A little bit about myself. Javier Villegas from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I work at MSC. Demes already introduced me. I am MVP in the data platform category since 2016, and I'm also Microsoft certified trainer. I'm also member of the advisory council for the Azure Data Tech community, and also a technical speaker member, mainly of multiple communities, especially here in Latam, in Argentina, and also PAS, right? You will see here my contact information, email address, Twitter, LinkedIn, and my blog, in case you would like to reach me if you have questions about this presentation and you would like to cover later. All right. Well, a couple of weeks ago in Seattle, Washington, Microsoft has presented SQL Server 2022. Bob Ward said many times that they didn't want to miss the year, so by mid-November they released it. Right? It's a SQL Server version that we've been testing for a year, a little bit more than a year. I was part of the private previews as well as the public previews and the release candidate. So myself, as part of the MVP program, and also being part of a Mediterranean shipping company, we work closely with Microsoft to work on this product. We evaluate multiple functionality, multiple features, right? But the one that we will cover in today are the ones related to performance, right? So what is really important is that SQL Server 2022 is not, let's say, something completely new. This is something that Microsoft already started with what they call the modern version of SQL Server, right? From 2016 onward, right? They've been doing this change regarding to performance, right? Which is, again, what we will be talking about today, since 2016 with the introduction of Query Store, right? The main objective of all this set of features is mainly to not only to make the SQL Server to run faster, right? There are multiple features that are going in that direction, but they are also trying to help us to solve one of the problems that we as DBA have been suffering since many years ago, which is mainly all the problems related to regression, right? In a nutshell, a regression is something that normally runs in a given amount of time that we normally know that it takes, few minutes, right? And one day, out of nowhere, it starts taking hours, right? Without anybody touching the code or anything, right? Those kind of problems are the one that Microsoft is trying to help us to solve, or at least to mitigate, right? So with the introduction of Query Store, and then, at the top of it in SQL Server 2017, with adaptive query processing, right, and automatic query tuning, they started accomplishing. Then in SQL Server 2019, they also introduced several features on this direction. They made, first of all, they rebranded what it was called adaptive query processing to be called intelligent query processing, right? They made several, new features that we will briefly cover. Also made a big changes to the release, so we can all see it and use them right away, right? So briefly, before moving on into the performance area, we are seeing here in this slide all the new features and all the investment that Microsoft has done in SQL Server 2022, right? Mainly in multiple areas like availability, security, right, and scalability, right? Definitely, those three main pillars are really important for Microsoft, and they have done a lot of investment in all these areas, right? Also, considering that now SQL Server runs from a small device like a Raspberry Pi, one of these, right? Or in a big data center on premise, or in the cloud with even multiple cloud providers, right? So definitely all this investment in SQL Server 2022 that we're seeing is really great. And also, as they are calling this version, the one that is highly integrated with Azure, or highly connected, let's say, right? Because there are interaction with managed instance in where you can easily set up an availability group and have a replica of your SQL Server 2022 workload in Azure. You can also use Azure Synapse Link, right, to synchronize or replicate some of your operational tables with Azure Synapse Analytics. And also you have the integration with Microsoft PureView for the governance, right? So now getting deeper into what it is intelligent query processing, right? We have seen Query Store, as I said, since SQL Server 2016, and there were several changes along the way, right? It was introduced in 2016 with the possibility of capturing execution plans and runtime statistics, right? Meaning how many times we execute a specific process, procedure, ad hoc query, right? Minimum amount of duration, maximum, average, etc. And then all the changes along with the query plans, right? In SQL Server 2017, they added the possibility to track wait stats, right, on query store, right? Not many big changes in 2019 directly on query store, but something to mention that is extremely important, right, is that in 2016, 17, and 19, query store was disabled by default. That means if we create a brand new database, or we restore a database from another server, right? Query store was disabled. If we want to use query store, we have to manually enable it, right? Just as a reminder, query store is something that works at database level. It's not that at instance level. So if we have multiple databases in our SQL Server instance, we have to enable query store in each of them, right? In Azure SQL, meaning Azure SQL Database or Managed Instance, since a while, when we have new databases, query store was enabled by default, right? Different to the SQL product, right? So we have that benefit in Azure SQL since a while ago, right? So now in SQL Server 2022, right, query store is way more relevant for the features that we will be covering right after, and probably for some of the ones that you already saw in previous presentations. So Microsoft decided to have query store enabled by default when we create a new database, right? This is huge because, again, Microsoft have this concept of not harm, right? So they don't want to introduce additional problems to your environments. That is why mainly query store was not enabled in previous version. But this time they decided to mimic what they have in Azure SQL, right? So again, if you have SQL Server 2022 today, if you enable if you create a new database, you will have query store enabled by default, right? And then we will see why. It's important also to consider that now, for the very first time, if we have this database with query store enabled, which is part of an availability group, right? So we have the primary, the read-write replica, and then we have the read-only replicas, right? Microsoft is working also to provide a different version of the query store for that specific database on the read-only replica. We know that, most probably the type of workload that we have in our primary server is completely different than the one that we have in our read-only replicas, right? So in SQL Server 2022, that is still not enabled by default. So if we want to use it as it's marked in the slide, we have to enable a trace flag, right? But additionally, what we have is query store as the of a bunch of features, right? And this is what we will be covering today, right? So in order to use degree of parallelism feedback that I believe it was presented on a previous session, and cardinality estimation feedback, we will call it CE feedback from this point onward, right? We need query store enabled, right? And we will see why, right? Then we have the other feature that we will also be covering, which is parameter sensitive plan optimization, PSP optimization, right? Which doesn't require query store, right? But it's extremely important to consider that we need query store for this feature, right? So Microsoft decided to call intelligent query processing next generation, right? So what do we need to do in order to start using all these features? Well, first of all, just by upgrading SQL Server to 2022, we will start seeing some of the benefits, right? Even in lower compatibility level, we will have improvement in what is called memory grant feedback, right? Which is one of the most important things that we have with intelligent query processing since version 2017. So if we want to use these features, PSP optimization, CE feedback, and DOP feedback, we need not only query store enabled, but we also need the databases with the latest compatibility level, which is 160, right? So, these are not the only things that we will have available with the compatibility level 116, but definitely we need them there in order to take advantage. Mm-hmm. So this is a quick summary of what intelligent query processing has been evolving since the beginning of the time, right? You will see here 3 types of boxes, right? The Cyan one, 2017, those are the ones that came initially. For example, memory grant feedback, right? Remember this case in where, when SQL Server compiles a plan, it grants certain amount of memory to that plan. So then SQL Server will be providing feedback to the engine and adjusting those memory grants depending on the execution, right? In 2019, there were other improvements, like, for example, the ones related to scalar UDF inlining, right? Definitely, something really important to also mitigate that problem that historically we got with the scalar function taking forever because SQL Server was not compiling them properly because they were not, taking them into consideration and making them at all. When in reality, we know that there was a lot of business logic within this scalar function. Now, since SQL Server 2019, with the scalar UDF inlining, what the query optimizer is doing is basically compiling the guts of the scalar function and then embedding that plan into the main plan, right? And now, in SQL, the white squares. Actually rectangles. And the one in blue are the ones coming with SQL Server 2022, right? You see that there are many of them. We will be covering from this point onward CE feedback and PSP optimization, right? So let's talk briefly about parameter sensitive plan optimization. What is parameter sensitive plan optimization? Well, this is actually an approach to try to mitigate the problem with the parameter sensitive, with the parameter sniffing situation, right? When SQL Server compiles a store procedure for the very first time that requires an input parameter, right? It will compile it with that plan and then doesn't matter which parameters we have, right? And how was this working till now, right? Before SQL Server 2022, right? When we execute the store procedure for the very first time, let's say with the parameter 1, the optimizer came for the plan saying, okay, what we need here is a seek, right? A seek to get what we need, right? Then, we execute the store procedure another time with a different parameter, let's say the number 10, right? And instead of needing a seek, it was better to use a table scan because it was more effective to get, the result, right? So if we have in the plan cache the plan that needed the scan, even if we go back to the previous execution with the previous parameter, right, it will be continued using the plan that is in the cache, right? So it's not effective, right? So this is a problem that we normally have. So what do we have now with PSP optimization? Let's say that we execute the store procedure for the very first time with one parameter. Again, SQL come up with the seek as the best option to run. Then we need, we execute it again with a different parameter, and this time it come up with the scan as the best option. So what SQL Server is doing now is keeping both plans, right, for the same query. So depending on which parameter you use, it will use one plan or the other, right? It won't be creating one plan for each parameter we have. It's going to be using an algorithm to detect or select which is the best plan to use according to the selectivity of the parameter, right? So really, really interesting. And now we will try to see it in action. I will explain what CE feedback is while we do the demo, right? So let me go here to my virtual machine. Here. All right. Okay. So let's prepare my demo here. Basically, what CE feedback will be doing is giving, providing feedback to the optimizer based on the execution, saying that, a specific process will be, more effective if we use a hint, right? We know that before SQL Server 2022, what we need to do is mainly to, check and monitor our workload continuously, right? And if we find that a specific process will run better in terms of resource usage, in terms of direction, with a specific hint, right? What we need to do is go and manually enter the hint, right? And then recompile the store procedure. So from that point onward, with, us having to modify the code, we will be using that hint, right? What CE feedback is doing is basically doing that for us, meaning is continuously monitoring the workload, trying to decide, options in terms of better hints to use. But instead of having us to modify the code manually, using Query Store is forcing those hints behind the scene, right? So we won't have to modify the code anymore, and SQL Server will take care of, putting the hints when they consider that useful. Then it will validate that the new executions with the hints is better. And if it is, it will continue using for some time. But this will continue, the evaluation constantly to see if maybe there is a regression or something, and will change it automatically. All this without us having to touch any code, right? So this is definitely huge, in my opinion. So what we will do here, I will create an extended event session, right here. Let's see if I am on the right computer. Yes. I will create an extended event session in where we will see, when C feedback get executed. So what I'm doing here is just watching the output of C feedback live. Then I will mainly change the compatibility level of my database to 160, cleaning the query store to start clean, and also cleaning the procedure cache. Here I have a store procedure, right? That is mainly doing select with some selectivity options. So what I'm doing here is just creating the store procedure. Right? What I'm doing here is executing that procedure SP demo CE 15 times. Right? So when I go here, I just run it. We go to the extended event. We see nothing. We check this DMBs related to query store and plan feedback, and it's still empty. Now I will run the store procedure one more time, the number 16 in this case. When I go here, now we see something in the extended event session. It is saying that it just performed an analysis and it is recommending this feedback, right? So when we go again to the DMB, we see, right, that there is this recommendation, which is saying pending validation. So I will execute it one more time, right? I will go back to my extended event session. Now I see here that it was validated, and it is telling me that the original CPU time was almost 4,000, and now is almost 3,000, right? If I go back here, right, and check my DMBs, now I have that, in my query store hints DMB, I have that for my query ID number 1, right? I have this hint in use, and the feedback down here got validated and passed, right? So from this point onward, if I continue executing this store procedure, it will be using that hint automatically without me having to go back to the store procedure and recompiling it with the hint, right? Here I have another case. I have, a select top, right, in where I just run it 15 times. When I go back to here, again, I have this from the previous example. I will execute it one more time. I go back to my extended event session. Now the analysis is saying that in order to, get an improvement, I will need this hint, disable optimizer row goal. It is distinct to the one that I used before, which was assume minimum selectivity for filter estimate, right? So if I run it one more time, right, again, the feedback will be validated. Original CPU time is almost 23,000, and now is 10,000, right? And if I go back to my DMBs, again, I am keeping track of my query ID number 4, and now is using this hint. Again, without us having to modify a single line of code. This is huge, right? I mean, it's doing the monitoring, the optimization, the validation, and continuing the execution without us having to do this. So imagine this feature running on a highly transactional environment in where, for that specific database, it will monitoring, right, and adding these hints on the fly. Really, really good, right? In my personal experience, I've been using it for a while now, and definitely is doing a great job. So now let's go to the other case, which is parameter sensitive plan optimization, right? What I'm doing here is also creating a store procedure in where we have to pass one parameter, the supplier ID. What I'm doing here, in this case, just for you to notice this, I'm setting the compatibility level to 150 and cleaning the procedure cache, right? So what I'm going to be doing here is executing the store procedure for the very first time with the parameter number 2. So I run it here. When I go to the execution plan, we can see here that is using an index 6, right? As the best way to get what we need. So now I will execute. First of all, I will clean the procedure cache. So now what we had there is gone. And I will execute the same store procedure with the parameter number 4, right? In this case, right, after it runs, right, see here that it's taking way longer and is returning more data. When I check the execution plan, it's recommending a scan, a table scan, right, which is more effective. Now we have in the plan cache, right, this plan that requires a scan. So I will go back to the previous one. I will run it with the parameter number 2 without cleaning the procedure cache, and you will see that this time, right, is coming up with the scan because it's the plan that is in the cache, right? Not good. So if I go here, I change. The only thing that I'm going to be doing here is change the compatibility level to 160, cleaning the procedure cache. And in this case, we don't need query store, but I just have it there, so I'm cleaning. So now database compatibility level is 160, SQL Server 2022. So again, I will run my procedure for the very first time. This one come up with a SIC, right? I will run it again. I will clean the procedure cache, right? I will run it with 4 again. This one will come up again with a scan as part of the plan, right? But let's see what happened if. So this plan is in cache right now. Let's see what happened if I run again this one. Remember, before it came with the scan. If I run it again, the new plan is also using the SIC, right? So for this specific query or query ID, we have 2 plans. And how we can check that, right? I have several DMBs here that are mainly telling me that, for the query ID 1, we have 2 variants, and we have the plan here, the one with the SIC and the one with the scan, right? So for the same queries plan, for the same query ID, actually, right, we have 2 plans in cache, right? Really, really interesting because, again, it will help us it will help the optimizers to run better because the plans will be more accurate, right? Super interesting. It's doing a great job. Again, I'm using this, and you don't have to do much here. Just changing the compatibility level to 160. Right? Okay, coming back here and just closing the demos, right? There are many other improvement in multiple areas: security, scalability, and availability, right? The ones related to buffer pool parallel scans are really interesting for server with a lot of data, a lot of memory, right? The ham-free 10 dB, right? In where they are trying to go to this approach of having to have the 10 dB kind of a hand-free without having us to do some tuning. It's all SQL Server 2022 is Azure enabled for disaster recovery, analytics, and security. You have seen this in this conference today and also in this session for CE feedback and PSP optimization, building query intelligence, right? So we don't have to do things that we had to do in the past to gain performance with no code change, zero code change, right? Innovations in security, scalability, and availability. Also, data virtualization for modern storage is also an interesting feature, and improvement or extending the T-SQL language with new functions. For all of you that would like to start with SQL Server 2022, here we see some links, right? So you can go there, download SQL Server 2022, the developer edition, which is free, install it, or deploy an Azure virtual machine with SQL Server 2022. Finally, some quotes from myself and MSC from previous year, from when that was for SQL Server 2019. And if you haven't seen the video that was presented by Microsoft of the company that I work for, MSC, and how we use SQL Server 2022, right? Here you have the QR code if you would like to watch the video. Finally, this QR code, you can go to the Microsoft documentation to check what's new in SQL Server 2022, not only in performance, but in all the areas, right? Finally, the same for Azure SQL Fundamentals. And with that, we just finish the presentation. I don't know if there are some questions or something, Dennis.
There was a question in chat, more asking our opinion about how these optimization features like CE feedback and PSP optimization would affect the machine learning process and process related to analytics. If they would have a good effect, bad effect, and also mostly asking our opinion about that.
Yeah, again, just having the possibility of using this since more than a year, I can, tell you that in my environment, which again are highly transactional environment, this is doing so well, right? Again, we have at MSC a big team of DBAs that before, one of the most important tasks was to do this, right? Optimize queries based on the execution, define or decide if maybe one hint is better to have less resource usages and with less CPU usage, and maybe better execution time, modifying the code, running it again, monitoring the new runs with the new hint in place, right? And deciding if it was okay or we have to revert that specific hint for any reason. All right? That part of the workload, right, is gone. Right? So I still don't know exactly what they are doing behind the scenes. Not sure how they do these recommendations, validations, etc. But as an end user, definitely this has a huge impact in terms of performance, right? And again, we still have certain cases in where there are some regressions, right? But way less than what we used to have, right? So in my opinion, of course, you cannot go today and upgrade all your production servers and enable this by default and just live like this. You have to test this. That is still my recommendation. But definitely, in my personal opinion, for our workload, this is extremely a lifesaver for us. Any other question?
So I'm understanding the workload that the DBA had before completely changed and then was reduced due to the new features. The DBA had less work due to the new features and can shift their work to more advanced work. Is that correct? What happened?
Yes, I can say so. I mean, this is Microsoft will continue investing on this part. This is that there are still few other ways to try to make it more complex, or work with workload with additional complexity. For example, PSP optimization, you have seen what I show in the demo, right? And that was on a store procedure which is using only one input parameters, right? There's going to be some cases in where you have procedures with multiple parameters in where PSP optimization will not work, basically because of that multiple input parameters. So those are the things that most probably will keep improving in the future to, again, trying to have this intelligent performance enabled for us and trying to make the performance something less to worry about when we have a SQL Server installed.